Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for today's panel discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed the lovely lunch session that we had, and everyone's energetic and excited for this topic today. I'm Hussein Jahoub, Group Director of Technology and Cyber Audit at DP World, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. As AI is rapidly evolving and becoming more and more accessible to the masses, a lot of challenges and risks are rising. AI is becoming accessible to everyone. Most of us over here, or perhaps all of us, have been using the generative AI, ChatGPT, Cloud, Copilot, etc. Most of the end users don't really care about what happens in the background. However, it's a different story for organizations. We're here today to explore a critical topic: weighing the pros and cons of single versus multi-cloud approaches for AI deployment. As AI becomes more deeply embedded into our business strategies, the underlying cloud infrastructure decisions are becoming more complex and more critical. I'm joined today by an outstanding panel of experts. A round of applause, please, for our gentlemen today. So let's dive in and get the views on how the organizations are navigating through this landscape. Also, I'd like to start with you. There's a lot of different opinions on single versus multi-cloud AI deployment approaches. So what are the strategic drivers behind choosing single versus multi-cloud architecture for AI workloads?
Assalamu alaikum. Afternoon, everyone. Let's try to break it down to simpler terms here. So I served at multiple boards a couple of years ago. Main question I used to get: let us come up with some top AI use cases. Last year it was about creating a unified cost model for the AI use cases. Today AI is a reality, and we are all trying to achieve the right balance between cost, security, and resilience. Now, single or multi-cloud, I think we have to accept the fact, unless you are a small startup, most of the enterprises today have workloads on multiple clouds. In the typical organizations, you will have maybe your email on Office 365, ERP on Oracle or Salesforce, and then typical workload on AWS or GCP. Hence, AI is similar as well. I mean, it's a question of flexibility or comfort. Would you like to keep all your workloads on a single provider? Is that smart or risky? Depends. Personally, what I have seen, cost efficiency has been a major strategic driver for adopting a multi-cloud strategy, where keeping workloads on multiple clouds will ensure that you have bargaining power. At the same time, today I feel hardware is a commodity. Yeah, everyone is saying getting NVIDIA Blackwell first, which means what's the added value with any cloud provider is the ecosystem, the framework that allowed enterprise to adopt. Now, data residency, data sovereignty, the ability to deploy an AI model close to your audience, to your customers, it's very difficult to say for a big enterprise, realistically speaking, to keep all your AI workloads on a single cloud.
I completely agree. I mean, having the risk of relying on a single vendor versus the safety net that the multi-cloud, which offers you, that's critical to the business continuity. Saleh, how does a multi-cloud approach help the organization stay agile and competitive these days in the rapidly evolving AI market?
Assalamu alaikum. First, I'd like to say it's really nice to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity. And congratulations for the 37th session of this. It's quite impressive. It's been very nice meeting the very esteemed colleagues today. We had a quick chat. I think in our chat we kind of touched on elements related to this question. I'm not a gambling man, but I know that if you're managing a portfolio, you got to spread your bets. And in this very dynamic environment that we're in at the moment, if you want to maintain agility, I would really advise against getting too attached to any single hyperscaler, to a particular LLM, to any sort of technology at the moment. I think everyone in this room is probably like me, trying to stay up to date with all of the changes in the AI space, and I'm sure you're just as overwhelmed as I am. We started writing a book 6 weeks ago to try and capture the point in time that we are in now, because we knew things would move very quickly. And within that space, the AI space has changed dramatically. MCP became popular, A2A's become popular, which is what we touched on earlier. For example, what we're doing in the Department of Government Enablement is we're embracing multi-cloud. We're working with currently Azure and AWS, and we'll bring in other providers, because we're trying to achieve this AI native concept of the government. When you think about where AI is going to go, it's going to move into the real world. Robotics and AI are going to converge. There's going to be solutions being provided by a multitude of providers who, some of them are linked to AWS, some to Azure, some to Google. Therefore, to really be able to navigate what's coming, you're going to have to embrace this multi-cloud concept. No single stack is going to provide everything you need.
Thank you, Saleh, for illustrating that, and I do echo that in this agile and dynamic pace, we do have to keep that in mind as well. Building on that, Oscar, if I may ask you, how does the cloud architecture affect the performance of the real-time applications, such as recommendation engines or the fraud detection systems? What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. As Oz and Saleh has mentioned, that I think multi-cloud is a reality. And having engineering in my title, I need to talk about technology a bit behind that. So I think what made really multi-cloud possible is the container architecture, microservices, and especially Kubernetes. So basically, today you can deploy a Kubernetes application. You can run it on AWS, EKS, or GCP, GKE, or Azure AKS environments, and you can easily move the workloads between the clouds. So the technology problem of provisioning the infrastructure via Terraform or deploying the applications in multi-clouds at once with GitOps has been addressed. So the real issue now is, once you deploy the application, how do you actually bring the clients to those applications, the eyeballs to those applications in the most performing way? And that's where actually you need to look into solutions, performance management solutions, and you basically need a global load balancer to be able to balance the traffic between different cloud providers. Most of the load balancers today work with the DNS, like IP addresses and load balancing between IP addresses. This is not effective anymore. So what you need is a context-based load balancing that can look into the actual request itself that comes from the eyeballs, that talks about the IP headers, URL paths, even the login information of a person. You want to route them to a different cloud based on the context of the conversation. That's what a CDN vendors usually that they can offer you. The next step is of course you want to accelerate that content. So best way of accelerating content is of course caching the content. You all know about that. It's very easy to do caching when it's static content or a video on demand, etc. But when it comes to real-time applications, it's actually becoming quite complex. You might remember a couple of months ago, actually in November, there was a fight between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul in Netflix, and Netflix crashed completely. So that tells you actually real-time streaming is not that easy, and Netflix has its own CDN, and it's one of the largest CDNs in the world. But they couldn't handle the traffic because they didn't really have the right technology receiving the real-time stream and multiplexing and caching it at the same time. So that's why you need to look into your partnership. So CDN is not that as easy as it seems. And final word on that is, you might be thinking, we are talking about AI here. How do you even cache AI? right? Because every AI request is actually a custom request. So that is actually, technology gets a bit more interesting. I can tell you more in the desk, so we have a booth, so I'm happy to talk more, but just very basically I can say that we are actually doing not keyword-based caching anymore. It's what we call semantic caching. We look into instead of the keywords or the content, we look at the meaning of the request. So basically, based on, we convert them to mathematical arrays, etc. So we can understand the similarities between two different AI requests. So what's the help in that? So you don't need to do all these API calls to your AI endpoint and save your tokens, etc. So and increase the performance of your application. So
Hussein, I have a question for you, if you don't mind. Now, I'm quite intrigued, honestly. I know you guys provide bot protection, publication files, etc.
Yes.
But Anthropic has computer use, and then you have OpenAI Operator, which is basically an AI that creates a browser session to browse the internet, pretending to be a human.
Yes.
I'm intrigued. How do you detect this traffic and block it?
yes, so I was hoping to talk about security a bit more, so you are opening the floodgates here. So that is actually our bot management solutions can address that. So what you are referring is we call headless browsers. So Chrome, Puppeteer bots, etc. So they can be the headless browser. It's actually the most difficult bots to detect. And we have a technology that we actually create the fingerprint of the connection. And from the fingerprint of the connection, it used to be behavior based. So you might actually notice the mouse movements on a browser and you would do fingerprinting based on that. Now there's a lot more going on behind it. So we do JavaScript challenging, etc. So because these headless browsers got so good in mimicking human behavior, so you need to do different fingerprinting techniques to identify those headless browsers. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Oscar. I think just to also take it back to the question about the performance, it's not just about the speed these days, about how the AI is performing. It's also about the consistency and reliability, similar to the example of Netflix crashing that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Since we touched point about cyber, I think maybe I can also ask you, what would be the implications of a multi-cloud AI architecture, and how can these risks be mitigated?
The security of AI infrastructure is actually quite a big topic. I mean, you need to think about different aspects of security. Throughout my career, I was lucky enough to work in different companies that address different aspects of those security. So you need to think about infrastructure security. Of course, in a multi-cloud environment, AWS, Azure, Google are providing their infrastructure security. When you deploy your app, you don't need to worry about the infrastructure itself that much. You need to think about the identity security. That's why you have vendors like, Okta, 1Password that will manages your identity environment, that integrates with your Active Directory or LDAP database where you hold your user data. Then you have the securing the data in transit, securing the data at rest. So you have different DLP, what we call CASB, Cloud Access Security Browser solutions, the zero trust technologies to be able to address that. And finally, for me, the most important aspect of security when deploying an app is actually securing the app itself. And that is actually where DDoS protection, web application, and API protection solutions, and also bot management solutions we just talked about comes into play. So in, for example, Netflix example, it was basically a DDoS. So what we call that problem a thundering herd problem in technology. So when so many requests come to the origin server, and they all had a miss in the cache environment, which means that everything needs to go to the source, all of a sudden that the original server cannot deal with that type of request. So it's basically a DDoS, legitimate traffic, becoming a DDoS traffic for the origin. In order to prevent that, actually, we have DDoS solutions. And in the past, DDoS solutions would be, you put a box, quite a large box actually, multiple servers, that would receive the traffic, load balance between different servers to be able to mitigate the attack. Now, DDoS protection doesn't happen at the origin, it happens at the source. The source is when the DDoS attack starts, When the DDoS attack starts, actually it starts from 30,000, 40,000 endpoints. And basically you can rent those for like $500 for 4 hours. So it is so cheap to launch a DDoS attack. And you need to stop those DDoS attacks at the source. So that's why you need a global edge network to be able to stop those DDoS attacks. And when you stop it at the source, your origin doesn't even know that the attack has happened. So we show our customers that the attack has happened, but they wouldn't actually know. And again, final word on the bot management side, I want to mention, in the bot managers, in the AI specifically, one of the biggest problems we see is actually the AI crawlers stealing your content from your website and constantly making a request to your website, which is increasing your egress costs on the multi-cloud environment. So this is becoming very, very costly. There is also AI fetchers now that they just pop up because everybody started using AI engines as search engines. So this means that every time someone makes an AI request, AI search, it fetches new content from your environment, and that makes an API call to your endpoint. So that makes your egress cost significantly higher than normal. So we have solutions to be able to address that, and that's why when you are deploying a multi-cloud AI environment, you have to really pay attention to the different security aspect of the solution.
And this is all before we start talking about sovereignty, which is like one of the, I think at the moment, one of the hot topics in terms of making sure that with all of the security aspects, you're also meeting the sovereignty requirements, which is, especially in the government, sovereignty is a really big deal. I don't know if you guys are, in your spaces as well, are you seeing that sovereignty is really becoming an issue?
Yes, especially in the EU, for example, that they have metadata boundary, we call it, is becoming extremely important. You need to keep the metadata of the traffic within the EU boundaries. And I believe in this region we have a similar requirement as well for compliance reasons. So that's why it's becoming very important. Your global load balancer is able to read into the request itself. So you can actually identify the geo from the request itself, from the IP header, so you can apply granular policies to be able to maintain that within the region.
Yes, and very valid concern, Saleh. I mean, AI Act is there now in EU. I mean, we broadcast our services in 4 continents, and you would be amazed that as a technology user, as a consumer, you still have to comply with those compliance. It all based on the type of data you're trying to protect. Personal identifiable information, PII, 100%. You'll have to dig deeper into what goes behind the scenes, the model, the bias, the transparency. It's not easy. Now, back to your point, Asgur, I wanted to add something. Now, multi-cloud security is not an emerging topic. I mean, we all have heard about CNAPP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platforms. Now everyone is talking about DSPM, so AI, Data Security Posture Management. What I have seen for the last 10 to 12 years, standard generic AI ML pipelines were enclosed into a pocket within AWS, SageMaker, within AI Studio and Microsoft. It was easy to secure. As you move into Gen AI, LLMs and agentic AI, with MCP, with A2A, you expand your attack surface. And then you get your technology stack exposed to prompt engineering, the ability for a teenager to get into the system prompt behind your AI model. It's a bit tricky, honestly, to manage and protect.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, gentlemen, for that very interesting topic. And just to add on top of that, I've seen a report yesterday from JP Morgan that we're actually discussing around AI and the security behind it. So what they were saying, and I'll just read it from here, is that around 80% of enterprises do the AI deployments and they're lacking proper security protocols behind them. Most of these companies can't explain how their AI is actually making these decisions. And security vulnerabilities have increased 4 times since mass AI adoption. And I think the ultimate problem is speed versus security over here. Saleh, if I can ask you a question here. For organizations that are just beginning their AI journey, what factors should influence them in their decision-making between single and a multi-cloud deployment?
It's a good question. Security, which is how you get it. And I think you mentioned it. So primarily you're going to be looking at agility versus security. How quickly can we deploy versus how secure do we need to be? Generally, I would suggest thinking of AI as a platform. You're trying to get a capability in the AI plus agentic space, and you want to think in modular. This is standard IT stuff, right? We always thought this way. I recommend not to get locked in very early on into anything. Embed your cybersecurity and your knowledge security. I think you touched on that just now. It's an interesting concept to start thinking about knowledge security. These AIs are actually creating and synthesizing new knowledge. And how do I secure that knowledge? How do I make sure that no one else can interrogate my AI? Because it's the same as, when I think of AI, I think of it as another form of employee. It's not an app. It's another type of employee. And I can't remember who said this recently. The job of the CIO of the future is going to be the HR officer of agents. That's basically what we're going to do.
IBM CEO.
Who's the IBM guy? Okay, great. So thank you. Now that I know, I can use that, because I use this quote a lot. So if you think about it that way, what you're creating is a platform and environment for AI and AI agents to create value for you in. You want to have a multi-cloud hybrid approach, very modular. You mentioned earlier, Oscar, that we can move workloads across. That's not a big deal. But in this dynamic space that we're in, agility and acceleration, as they say, the acceleration is accelerating, these are going to be the key things, because it's a competitive landscape. If you're not the fastest in the market, somebody else will be. The opportunities are large, but speed and agility are the number one differentiating capabilities, I think, at the moment. And hybrid cloud is great at helping you with that. We believe with what we're doing with the different hyperscalers and adding in the sovereign controls, that we'll be able to provide that platform for the government. Our goal is by 2027 to have this fully AI native government. We've got like 100% cloud adoption as our target, because we see that we'll be able to serve our community and our citizens, building all of this AI. It's really AI is the driver. And for anyone making the decision now, be flexible and be ready to adapt and be agile.
No, I think that's amazing insights and advice, and I will be borrowing that quote, by the way. On that topic as well, I was maybe, in your opinion, what would be some of the best practices that would help the company in managing the deployment?
I would like to provide a concrete example here. And again, not that I have anything against AWS, I'll just mention it as an example. Now, AWS is betting all its future on Anthropic, okay? Billions of dollars invested. Now, as an enterprise, would I wait for a single cloud provider for Amazon, knowing that Anthropic has been extremely slow in releasing LLMs to the market because they focus on transparency, on ethical use, SON 3.7, or try to adopt an open model where you create a framework and you simply start ingesting your data into, let's say, OpenAI on Microsoft, then run the inference on Gemini, on GCP, because Flash 2.5 is cheap. And then at the end, send your data to be archived on Glacier, on AWS. Yes, it's complex to manage. You have utilized multiple clouds, but I feel today the technology stack, the security will allow you to protect your data. What you get from this bargaining power, you don't have to keep all your eggs into a single cloud basket. OpEx will be cheaper, 25 to 35% cheaper once you use multiple clouds for your AI stacks. And I always say this to my team, is trading the comfort of today for the flexibility of tomorrow, as simple as that. We don't want to be left behind. You want to be able to move your workload anywhere in a matter of seconds.
I would like to add to this one, I think in terms of best practice, what Saleh, you mentioned about agility of the clouds. When we talk about multi-cloud, everybody always thinks about the hyperscalers, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, or Alibaba, and you name it. Actually, cloud is bigger than that. So especially in AI environment, I would encourage all of you to look into serverless computing, which is edge development, edge computing as an alternative or a complementary solution when you are deploying AI practices. For example, Hussein, you earlier asked me about the fraud detection systems or recommendation engines. So these are very lightweight AI ML applications. You can actually run those AI inference, we call it, so the AI responses, you can run it on the edge cloud, on the compute. For example, in our environment, as an example, you can run it without using containers. You can run it on WebAssembly. You can develop in any language. You might have 10 different developers developing your application. One of them might be developing in Rust. One of them might be developing in JavaScript. One of them might be developing in C++. You can compile them together into WebAssembly, and you can call it as a function. So you might have heard the term function as a service. So this is what serverless computing is. You don't even need to deploy very large, massive applications to be able to actually use AI on the edge. So take a look at the concept of running AI inference on the edge compute. You can use those you can make a call from your main application on the hyperscaler cloud to those edge applications. So when, for example, a mobile app we detect a fraud, someone makes a $1,000 spending and that doesn't fit into their spending profile, let's say based on location and the spending habits, etc., you can actually easily, quickly detect that on the edge, and you can stop that and give an alert on the edge. Or when an e-commerce website is running and someone is connecting to that website from Bahrain, for example, you can actually make a recommendation from the nearest POP point of presence, the edge cloud, closest to the user without going to your backend. Actually, it's almost like your CDN responding to the request. So there are many ways that will increase the performance, that will reduce the cost, that will increase the customer satisfaction. In e-commerce, for example, there is like 4 times conversion difference if a website serves under 100 milliseconds versus 500 milliseconds. So
I have to say, it's still an emerging topic. I mean, Apple Intelligence failed miserably on the edge so far.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an excellent point. Cloud isn't, I said this a couple of days ago, cloud isn't OneDrive. Cloud is not a space that I'm going to move things into. It is a technique for how we build our services. It is a bunch of different tools working together. And that's to build on your point, is that concept of a platform. You need to think of it as a platform. Your cloud is a multi-cloud hybrid concept with some, like you said, edge devices, all involved in an ecosystem of applications, and really we're talking about agents eventually, especially when you think about robotics and robots and where we're going. Eventually each one of these agents is going to be encapsulated within some physical representation. There's going to be robots in the home, robots at work, robots in the streets. Our cars will be robots, our planes will be robots, and all of these robots will live in an AI native world which is in the cloud. It is the cloud. The cloud is the world for agents, basically.
I think if I wanted to summarize everyone's thoughts around it, optimizing costs would be one, the performance and customer happiness. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Saleh, in your view, and maybe this is a question I can ask the panelists as well, what is the most critical success factor on choosing the right cloud approach for the long term for AI scalability and innovation?
I think we've talked about it, I think, a few times so far. It's it's being agile. You're just going to have to be flexible. you're going to have to work within the ecosystem that currently exists, plan everything to eventually be able to integrate and build synergies. We've seen the evolution of for example, I'll give you an example with TEM here in the UAE, right? So there was a famous moment when our leadership within the country, I think it was Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid at the World Government's Summit, I think it was, and he pulled out his phone and he said, I want all of the services of the government to be in the phone. And in the UAE, we've been on this path for a while, and I think, just very quickly, show of hands, if you guys have used TEM. Has anyone used TEM? Okay, good. Yeah, there's some. Okay, good, great. All right. The customer satisfaction surveys say that you like it, so I hope that's accurate. So when we started off, there was a lot of disparate organizations in pockets, and they were all, they weren't integrated, and they were all doing different things, and it was kind of like e-government movement. And then we started moving people onto this TEM platform. This one window where you could get to 72 or I don't know how many government entities. There's a lot of them. And as we slowly integrated them and we started to move them closer and closer together, we ended up, achieving. For example, we've reduced 90%. So 90% of government walk-ins, we've eliminated them. People now, as we've integrated all of the different services together, we've allowed for things like spaces. So if you're a business owner, you can go to a particular space in TEM that only offers services that are unique to your particular case, right? So they're framed for you. These kind of integrations, if you start off, because that's what your customers, that's what your citizens, that's what your stakeholders are going to want eventually. So start off upfront with that in mind. Start off upfront with that in mind. Build that into it doesn't mean slow down. It doesn't mean don't start a pilot, don't start a POC somewhere. Do it. But always do it with that idea long term. I'm going to integrate all of this together at the end. That'll save a lot of money, and it'll give you that advantage, that comparative and competitive advantage to be able to stay alive in the game. Yeah, I think I'll stop there because I can give the rest of the guys some time.
No, thank you for that. Oscar, maybe the same question to you, briefly.
Actually, what you told me, what you just mentioned, Saleh, reminded me some of the initiatives that's happening around the world. What I notice is the thought leadership doesn't always come from places that people think that it comes from, like Western Europe or United States. In this particular area, the thought leadership comes from other places, like Estonia is, for example, the most digital country in the world. And UAE is making a lot of attempts in the leadership of Saleh here. And for example, I'm Turkish originally. In Turkey, we have a system called Devlet, which is e-government. Basically, from the same place, you can request your criminal records, you can look at all your title deeds, you can look at the amount of fertilizers used in that. If you are a farmer, you can look at your fertilizer usage report from the same system. So, all population services, etc., hundreds of services in one place. So that kind of environment actually is very, very useful. Of course, then you get being a security person, I get quite cautious or stressed about the security of that environment, because when you integrate all those solutions together, for example, in Turkey, there's been a leak from the health ministry or something. So they were able to, find the source and maybe stop it. But you need to control every one of those source of information coming, and data governance is becoming a massive, massive challenge. So just a kind reminder, you are taking a massive undertaking out there. So it's a very, very big project, and I think it makes life a lot easier for the citizens, for sure.
How's in your view?
I would take it from here. You mentioned data governance. Personally, I feel the main challenge with AI is data. You need to have complete visibility over your data stack, classify your data, label it, tag it, and then you worry about encryption, at rest, transit, making sure your keys are managed properly. Moving forward, try to always use an open stack for your database, for your RAG, for your vector DBs across the board. And to improve your maturity, if you are getting into the AI pipeline, you will have to use policy as a code instead of policy as a PowerPoint. I always say this to my team. Try to automate wherever possible. And you as CIOs have a huge leverage when you negotiate with a cloud provider, with the AI provider. I always say, add a clause in each contract that will give you a flexible egress in your contract. Because let's be realistic, tomorrow I would want to move my data from GCP to AWS. But if egress will cost me $1 million, I will think twice. So.
Yeah. So that is actually a major issue at the moment, so in terms of data governance. So that ties into the strategy that you want to follow in your multi-cloud journey. So some companies that I'm seeing, they are making a decision to have a split cloud, which means that their production environment is locked into, let's say, AWS, and for their DevOps environment, they are using actually Google for development. So Google has a lot of developer tools that they find it useful. But if you are going on the direction of having an active or active standby multi-cloud journey, this means that you have a massive problem of having two distinct data buckets. So you might have an S3 bucket holding your data for Amazon and bulk storage holding your data for Azure. So how do you synchronize those data? How do you serve this data? The performance of this data is becoming a really big problem. So we see some customers are actually looking into centralizing their buckets and serve both workloads through the centralized bucket. That also has a problem in terms of performance. For example, when you make a call from Azure to AWS S3 bucket, it's not performing as you would expect. So one solution to that is actually some CDN providers, we are one of those, that we came up with our own object storage. So because you are already using your CDN for performance reasons, for caching reasons, so we can centralize your storage as well in the CDN environment, and we can serve to all buckets, because for every single cloud provider, hyperscaler, we have a direct exchange with them, very big links. So we are able to serve those quite fast. And the great news for you is we don't have egress charges. And there is one other company like us doing that. They don't have egress charge as well. And we are advocating actually getting rid of those egress charges because they are extremely prohibitive in terms of moving cloud, changing your cloud vendor. So.
Thank you for that. And I can see we're a bit short on time. I'd like to open the floor to the audience if there are any questions to our esteemed panelists.
Hello. Hi. Hi, Sally. At the start, you mentioned about spreading bets, and I wanted to go back to the discussion about sovereign cloud systems as well, and what kind of risk comes with spreading your bets and using a multi-cloud approach when you're also trying to control and have total governance over your data. Is there anything that sort of conflicts between the single versus the multi-cloud approach when it comes to that conversation?
Okay, if I heard the question, thank you for the question. So if I heard the question correctly, you're saying that does multi-cloud introduce more security concerns?
Less security.
Is it less?
Yeah, is it less secure?
Would multi-cloud lead to less security concerns?
I wonder if you're going to have to encourage each different service provider to, adhere to specific regulations that make it apply for a sovereign cloud system. Is that something that kind of factors into that conversation? Or maybe
I think we'd hear you better without the mic.
Oh, you can? I've got a loud, booming voice. How does the conversation on sovereign cloud systems fit into the versus narrative between single and multi-cloud? Is that a sort of a factor that needs to be considered when they're deciding to go?
Sovereignty and multi-cloud.
Yes.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. Appreciate the question. Thank you. So sovereignty, generally as a term, means that it's in country, right? With cloud, obviously, there's different meanings of what is in country. Is the data in country? Is the processing in country? Is it transiting in country? Are the people operating it in country? And is it subject to any laws that are not in country? So there's like several different layers of considerations when we think about sovereignty. In terms of multi-cloud, as long as each provider of your cloud, so let's say we're dealing with Azure and dealing with AWS, as long as each one of them individually is compliant with the sovereign controls that meet the expectations of the whichever jurisdiction you're in, then whether it's multi-cloud or single cloud, I can't see any particular new problem arising from that, whether it's single or multi-cloud, as long as each one is compliant with the controls that are relevant to the jurisdiction that you are in. I'm trying to think if there could be something related to it. Potentially, if you have some management platform that is outside of the sovereignty, and then that is somehow managing the two, if you're trying to integrate between them in some degree, but it shouldn't. It shouldn't. I think that's my brief answer, is it shouldn't.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that, because sometimes in technology world, we are really struggling with what defines the boundary for the data and what is actually data, right? For example, in Austria a couple of years ago, there was a scams 2 ruling that actually changed the whole EU infrastructure for regulations. So we had to do a lot of adjustments for a simple reason. One judge made a decision how an IP is read as a PII or where can it be maintained. Very practical example. I talked about the attack data coming and stopping that attack at the edge. So my edge POPs might be in the country, but I need a control plane that will receive these requests come in, and somebody needs to process that information and bring these pieces coming from 100 different data centers that attack traffic. Someone needs to correlate it and feed that information back. So if you stop us from using IP address because it's a personal identifiable information, if I can't use the IP header, I cannot process attack traffic. Simple as that, right? So that is actually making it really difficult, because unfortunately, either the judges don't understand the technology as much as we send people explaining those things, or sometimes some of the government entities, they are demanding things that's technologically not possible or not feasible. So we have to make a decision as technology companies, what is feasible for us, and sometimes it stops us from investing in that country because of the heavy regulations. So yeah, there's a good balance that needs to be maintained for those.
Before you wrap up, because I know we're going to wrap up, I want to thank everybody who came here after lunch and participated in this session. We were talking about how it's going to be a difficult one, so thank you for being here.
Thank you to our esteemed panelists for their insights today and sharing their experiences. And thank you to the audience as well.
Thank you very much.